Hey everybody, from Jeff's Little Engine Service. So check it out, it's XR400 day, Honda XR400. I already have this one all dialed in, but today we have to get this one dialed in. And what I have here is a 2002 Honda XR400, one of the best bikes ever made. And a real common problem you'll get with any motorcycle is carburetor issues. Now this one is really difficult to start, and it's even started to leak some gas out of the carburetor, out of the overflow here. So it's time to get into this thing. And I'm going to show you the easiest way to take off the carburetor on this bike. It's not as easy as it is on some of the older bikes, but it's not as bad as you think. So let's do it. And I'll show you how to clean the carburetor and rebuild it, because that's what it needs to get it running good again. First thing we should do is take off the side cover, the seat, and the gas tank. I have a 12mm socket here for the seat. And don't lose the little spacer here. You have one on the other side. And now you can just slide the seat off, like so. That's what holds the seat on, that little slot there. And then you have your brackets here. And for the side cover here, you have two Allen bolts. It says it's a number 5 metric Allen wrench. These are special bolts, so don't lose them. They have a little shoulder on them. And then we have a couple of little tabs that go into the fender there. You can see right there, don't break those off. And I'll screw these back in so I don't lose them. So one of the first modifications you should do to your XR400 is take out the snorkel, which is what went in this hole here. If yours is still in place, you won't have that hole here, and it'll be a rubber piece that comes out. Call it the snorkel.
Get that sucker off of there.
So it can breathe, baby. So the plan is to free up the rear section of the frame here so we can tilt it up. To do that, you have to take off your muffler and just remove these screws on both sides, and that's about it. Still my 12mm socket here. Oh boy, that sucker's tight. No! Ah! Get a cheater bar. You can always get it with a cheater bar. Yeah! And you have another bolt here. Oh boy. And there's a washer on that one, so don't lose it. And then the clamp. And you don't have to take this one all the way out usually. Just loosen it almost all the way. Now to get these mufflers off, you basically just have to kind of twist them. Then they come loose. Sometimes there's a gasket in here to worry about. Alright. This one might be hard to get out. It has some yellow paint on it. That usually means that it's in there tight. So it looks like this is a number 6 Allen wrench here. Oh boy. I'm going to spray a little bit of lubricant in there. So these bolts aren't quite so dry. Right. Another special bolt with a shoulder on it. Time to do the other side. See that? We're already loose. And I added a brake switch on this bike. So I'm going to have to disconnect the wires here to get the rear section all the way up. There we go. Now the carb intake boot already came off. I didn't have to loosen it, but you may have to loosen yours before you can tip up the rear section. Watch your mud flap here. So now we can get to the carburetor and pull it out from behind. Oh, I forgot, we have to take off the gas tank so we can get to the cables a little bit easier. Pretty easy to take off these tanks. You just have bolts on both sides. Right here at the bottom, it's a 10mm socket. And on the other side here. And then up here you have this strap, which just pulls up like that. Now to get the tank the rest of the way off, the only thing we need to do is remove the fuel line. We do that from the other side. So I think I'll take the fuel line off the carburetor side instead of the petcock here. You can see it back in there. And I use these angled needle nose pliers a lot just because it helps me to get back into places. And you twist and pull. There you go. And now the tank comes off. Just be careful, sometimes the petcock on this side gets hung up on the wires. There we go. So now we have to take off the cables, which is pretty easy to do. The top one, you can see, you just tighten it up all the way. The bottom one here kind of has an adjustment, so what I just make sure to do is just keep this nut in place and hold on to that one and then loosen it with that one until I can get it loose enough to pull the cable out of those little brackets. It's a 10mm. So this top one you can just loosen up here. And you loosen it up a bit and eventually you can pull it out of that bracket. Killer wiener dogs up the street, can you hear them? So this nut here is the one that sets the adjustment. So this space right here is what you want to be conscious of. When you put it back together, you want it at the same gap right there. Let's see if I can loosen this up without messing up the adjustment too bad here. Yeah. Looks like that nut's staying in place as I loosen it. So you loosen it up a bit, and you can get to a point where you could spin this nut. Alright, and I have a big enough gap. I can take that out and do it with the top one too. Alright, and then we move to here, and we hopefully can pull this cable enough to get it out of there. Yeah. There we go. That one's kind of tough when the carburetor is still mounted, so I'm going to finish dismounting this carb. All we need to do is loosen the strap here. You don't have to take this off either, just loosen it up. Just loosen it up almost all the way. Oh, I need to remove this too, just so it's easier to get to it. Get this thing off of there, get some more room. And I just tucked this down behind the kickstart. Put that back in so I don't lose it. So I got this clamp off, now I can just twist this off. And the other hose just mounts on the side here. Comes off easy enough. Now I should be able to rotate the carburetor a little bit, or even take it out, and I can get a little better view of how to take the cable off here. There we go. Should be able to pull the carburetor out. Oh, I see one more drain hose on the other side I missed. Trust me, it comes out. There we go.
That's how it's done, son.
Now we'll open this thing up and see what's going on the inside. So that's the trick, folks. What do you think, Bo? Only took me about 10 minutes. So here's where we're going to do it, out in the sunshine, folks. And you can see some of the tools I have here: a Q-tip, a brass bristled brush because the brass won't scratch the aluminum, a regular toothbrush, and a pipe cleaner. Probably need some other stuff too. So I brushed off the outside of it the best I could, so when I open up the float bowl I don't get any dirt that goes in there, although we're going to clean everything anyways. You have 3 Phillips head screws. Now before I take this off, so here you have one of your adjustment screws for your carburetor. I believe it's the slow speed adjustment. So if you take it out, alright, let's see what it looks like inside this carburetor. Not real dirty at all. That's a good sign. Since it was leaking, We're probably going to, of course, need to clean everything out, but we'll have to replace this float needle valve. That's probably just worn out. They do wear out. And to get out the hinge pin here, to get the float off, I just turn it like this, tap it, and you can see the pin coming out here. You can just pull it, keep track of that for sure. And lift it right off. Looks like the float valve stayed in place. This is what we're going to replace. That little rubber tip wears out. And that's why it leaks. So let's replace it. Here's the inside of your carburetor. And you can see here you have your main jet, and then your slow speed jet, and then your carburetor fuel adjustment right here. If you end up taking this out, you're going to want to make sure you know how many turns out it is, so you don't screw up the adjustment to your carburetor. But if it's screwed up, I believe the preliminary adjustment on this is you turn it in, of course, until it bottoms out, and then you turn it out usually about 1.5 times. 1.5 to 2 times. So if you look closely at this rubber tip, I mean really close, like with a magnifying glass or something, you'll be able to see a worn in groove, like a ring that goes around it where it seats. And if it's obvious where you can really see it, like an indentation in the rubber, then you know it's time for a new needle jet. I can see a slight groove on this one as I turn it around. So the key to a good carburetor rebuild and cleaning is to clean out the inside thoroughly. There's a lot of stuff that builds up in here that can flake off and start plugging things up. And you'll definitely want to do the same thing to the float bowl. And if you need to use carburetor cleaner, just make sure you remove this O-ring before you use any carburetor cleaner. Otherwise it could swell up. Your gasket here in your float bowl, this O-ring is still usable. You can reuse it as long as it's not too dried out or cracked or broken or anything like that. So another thing we're going to do to this carburetor, because this motorcycle has always had a problem hard starting. You have to kick it about 20 times before it'll start sometimes. It's usually because the carburetor is too lean. They're not getting enough gas to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace the pilot jet down here, the slow speed jet, and the main jet. As you remember, we opened up the air box a little bit by taking the snorkel off, so we want to richen up the carburetor to match the extra airflow coming through. You want to be very careful taking out these jets too. They're made of brass and they can break off really easily. So I'm going to take this out and look to see what size it is. I think I know what size I need. Use my little jeweler's loop here. And I could see the number on it is a 52. So I was told I need to go up to a 60 for the pilot jet. So let's try that. We're going to get a 60 pilot jet. And I was told to get a 160 main jet. But let's see what number it is in it here. And you can just remove this end piece, which is the main jet, or you can remove it from here, and that removes the whole nozzle. And since I'm cleaning this carburetor, I'm going to remove the whole nozzle. And to do that, I'm going to use this teeny tiny crescent wrench. Be careful. Be careful, don't strip it. Nice. This carburetor was pretty clean. I think it was just time for a new needle jet and an upgrade kit on the jets here. So this jet, the main jet, is a... Alright, it took me a while to read this one, but it says 140, and I'm going to bump this to a 160. And if you look close at this nozzle, you'll see that there's a lot of little teeny tiny holes along the side of it here, and you'll want to make sure to poke those out with a little piece of wire. Okay, let's order these parts. You want to get off all that buildup. Clean up all that. It's a little thin buildup that occurs on this stuff. You want to make sure to clean it off. If you look real close, you can see a little powdery buildup, it looks like, on the aluminum. So scrub all that off. You want to make it as clean as possible in there. All the little nooks and crannies. And this is where your fuel comes in here, so I usually use a Q-tip just to make sure that passageway is all cleaned out. And be careful cleaning down in here. You don't want to scratch anything. I mean, be really careful not to scratch anything down in there, because that's where your needle jet sits. And this brass insert is called your seat. And when your carburetor gets really bad, you have to replace not just the needle, but this seat too. And you can see it's not real easy. You have to pull this one out somehow and pound a new one in. But I think we're probably good just getting a float. I think we're good just getting a float needle valve to fix this problem at this point. This carburetor's still in pretty good shape, so I assume the seat's in good shape. And you can use this to look down in there to see if you see any scratches where the needle seals down in there. I can see some crud down in there I need to get out. Use a soft Q-tip. Never use anything like a pipe cleaner down in there, because pipe cleaner has metal in it and it can scratch. So just use a very soft Q-tip. It's the only thing you should ever clean the seat with, or air. If your carburetor is really dirty, you're going to want to make sure to clean down into all these ports and passageways, including the ones in here. But this carburetor is not too bad, so I'll blow some air through all these passageways and a little bit of carburetor cleaner, and I'm sure it'll be fine. So be careful not to damage this little throttle needle. And we shouldn't have to take off the top here at all, unless we wanted to change this needle position. But I think the stock setting, which is the third groove on the needle, is what I want to do for this modification with the bigger jets. Alright, so the parts came in. Got my 160 main jet, 60 pilot jet, and here's the float valve. The part number on it is 186354, and I believe that's a K&L aftermarket number. So I wasn't planning on getting into this cover here. I'm actually not quite sure what this part of the carburetor does. It kind of looks like an accelerator pump, but I don't think it is. Might as well check underneath. The carburetor was running pretty good once the bike was running, so I don't think we have any problems in this portion of the carburetor, but let's at least take a look, see what's in here. may be a spring, so be careful. All right, so that's what we have. And we'll take a close look in here, just make sure everything's still rubbery. I don't see any tears. Looks like we have an O-ring right here. That's in good condition too. So I don't think I'm going to mess with this. We'll just put it back together. And you'll want to check for rips and tears in this little diaphragm here. I don't see any. And the rubber still feels pliable for the most part. So let's just put it back together. And we'll put the cap on the spring. Make sure it's centered. And push it down into place. And you got to hold it there. And make sure it's on good and flat and square on here before you tighten it down, otherwise you could break this little cover. Alright. There we go. So I just had this piece screwed in here finger tight so it would protect the needle here. But let's go ahead and separate the jet from the emulsion tube. This is a 7mm. It feels a little big. Yeah. Let's see if we can try a 6. Alright, so I'll hold this bottom section with my crescent wrench, and we have a 6mm socket here. Be careful, this stuff can break. Alright, there's your main jet. Alright, there's our 160 going in. Now be careful when you tighten this up, because this brass breaks really easily, so don't over tighten it or you'll be hating life. Clean the tube off. I think we can go back in place here. Here's our 60 slow jet to replace our, whatever that other one was, 52 I think. It's tough to know how tight to do these that you don't break them. So just be very careful. I don't know what the torque spec is on, but I just get it about as snug as I can get it without cranking down on it. Get our float here, make sure it's good and clean, and our hinge pin. And we have our new float needle. Put the needle on the float there. Just like that. Get our pin in here. So to check the float height, you want the float to just touch down, and that's where you take your measurement. From this flat spot here, on the carburetor up to the top of the float. So let's see if we can get some specs on that measurement. Alright, so I got this information from a YouTuber named TrailRider42. He has a really good tutorial on this carburetor, and I think he knows what he's talking about, so I'm going to go with what he said. So the minimum setting, they call it, as I say, you want the float just to set here. You don't want it to activate the spring-loaded portion when you measure it. So right there, and you measure from the flat spot on the carburetor here to the top of the float, and you do it right in the middle, basically, so you're in the middle of the main jet, and the setting is 14.5 millimeters. This one may be set about a millimeter or two too high, so I think I'll go ahead and adjust it. And to adjust it, you just bend the tab here that's attached to the needle. So I'm just going to put a little screwdriver under this tab, bend her down a little bit, see if we get a better reading now. Yep, that's set just about right. 14.5 millimeters from the top of the flat part on the float here to the flat spot on the carburetor. TrailRider42 also mentions this tab here. And he refers to that one as the max drop setting. And what that is how far the float will drop down. Apparently, if you're hitting a lot of bumps on your motorcycle and your float is flopping around, it can cause runnability problems. So let's go ahead and fix this max drop. He says between minimum drop and max drop it should only be 5 millimeters. You can see we've got about 20 millimeters drop there, so let's adjust that. And to do that, you just have to bend this tab a little bit. So you can see now how the drop is much less. So let's measure that. He says you want about 5 millimeters for the drop. And we're less than 5 millimeters, so I'm going to bend that tab back a little bit. And we're way less than, probably only at about 2.5 millimeters, so I'm going to bend that tab back the other direction. A little bit more. Found myself prying against one of these posts, and I'm a little nervous about doing that, so be careful, because you could just snap that post right off. All right, our max drop is set at about 4.5 millimeters. So I think we're ready to put this carburetor back together. Alright, so I've made the float bowl spotless, and we're completely clean on the inside of the carburetor here too, so we can go back together. Get these screws back in here. Let's see. If I put the carburetor like that, I should be able to crank down pretty good on these. pretty much as tight as you can get it without stripping them. There we go. We're ready to go back on. Oops, I forgot to put this little bracket back on. It's just what this overflow hose goes through. Alright. I bet you half of you are going to forget to put this little bracket on. It's not the end of the world if you don't put it back on. Alright, they never go back in as easy as they come out. Wish me luck. So, I think I can hook up these after the carburetor goes in. Put a little lubricant on the throat here of the carburetor and into the boot. Helps it go in easier. It's not easy getting it through there, but it gets through. Alright. Not all the way in yet. I want to make sure I can wiggle it around to put these hoses on. I think I can push the carburetor pretty much all the way in. And as long as I can move it around, I can still mount up the cables and whatnot. Overflow number 1. Then we have your drain line. There we go. And there's a drain line on the other side here too. I'll put the bottom cable on here first. Plenty of slack in it to get the little barrel in place. You can see you just have to do it like that. So this bottom cable actually goes behind the throttle adjustment screw. You have to route it right next to the carburetor. I can't get my camera back in there to show you. It won't work unless you route it that way. Alright, so now the cable is routed correctly on the other side of the carburetor. I wish I could show you guys that, but too tight of a view. You can figure it out. Should have plenty of slack here to put the barrel in place. If you put the bottom cable on first, it works best. Alright. So a good way to do this is to get both of the barrel ends in place before you try to attach them to the bracket here. And I've found that putting the top bracket on first seems to work best for whatever reason. Alright, we have the top cable in. The old man's gonna get him.
Get him, killer.
Good boy. And then you can get this bottom one on pretty easy, just like that. And now time to tighten them down. Definitely put in the top cable first. It's a lot easier that way. And then we just tighten this one down all the way. And then this one, you can see you got to tighten that up to there. Alright, I have the top one all tightened down. Now it's time for this one. And once you get it to where it was before you took it off, this little gap right here, then you can tighten down this one and that'll lock it into place. All right, and you can see the gap I have there. As you can see, it's less than a 1/4 inch gap. That's right about where it was. Now we can tighten up the intake manifold. Make sure your carburetor's pushed all the way in and tighten it down. Pretty snug. There we go. Think we can put the brake reservoir back in place.
Boom.
That was fast, wasn't it? I think we're ready to start bringing this tailpiece back into place. We'll have to loosen up this clamp because if you remember, it popped off without me having to even loosen it. So I'll loosen that up and just make sure it gets onto the carburetor and we can tighten that down. One thing to look out for is when you're lowering this back into the place, this little mud flap needs to be tucked up. You can see I have a stoplight switch here. I actually converted this motorcycle to street legal, so that's what this little component is. Alright, so I've loosened up this clamp, and let's see if we can pop this in place. Make sure your swing arm goes into the brackets down here. Make sure this boot gets on. Alright, it popped right on. Just make sure to check it all the way around. Tighten this baby up. I'll go to the other side and put the other one in. Well, you all know what we got to do now. We got to get that pipe back on there. Alright. Twist it into place. Make sure the clamp's loose, of course. When you get it in far enough, you can put in this mounting bolt. Get that one started. And this one goes back in. Alright, so I have the tank, the seat, and the side cover back on. Let's see if we did any good here. So I have the choke on, and I'm going to pull in the compression release lever, give it full throttle, and kick it through about 5 or 6 times. Now I'm going to release the lever, release the throttle, find top dead center where it's stiff when you try to kick it, and let's kick this thing over, see what happens.
Nice!
That's a fix, folks.